if you want to become a high performer, set yourself some challenging goals. 20% of people set goals, only 30% of that 20 write them down, and only 8% of people achieve them out of the 30. So I would write down some goals you've got for this year, and then break them down into point 2, which is, well, how can I put in a routine to help me achieve that goal?
The sub-tip within that is identify your controllable inputs. And that's almost like the under piece here that feeds into all of the above, especially when it comes down to a job search. What would be your top 3 recommendations for candidates to position themselves as high performers in an interview process?
So an easy way to ease yourself into it is to...
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Open to Work podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by friend and founder of Elite Team Tactics, Alex Ayin. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. 2025, let's go.
Yeah, and we're here to talk about high performance. So watch out, Jake Humphreys, we're coming for you. But the entire kind of episode is like, how can you think about what high performance is? Let's put some definitions around it. And then let's also dive into what do you need to do to position yourself as a high performing candidate in this market as well. So it's super important and very good topic for us to get into in January, February of 2025. So Alex, to kick us off with, like you're in an interview, funny, fun question. Tell me about yourself.
Well, I set up Elite Team Tactics to translate and share some of the principles from elite sport and the special forces and some of the best teams in the world. What are they doing better than anyone else, which is enabling them to reach peak performance and to break world records? And I've just been passionate about that for my entire life. I grew up in a sports family. I played quite a high level of water polo, national water polo and international water polo. We, as a school team, were national champions under 14s to under 18s. So I was in a winning culture for a really formative part of my life where we actually went unbeaten for a whole season. So the hard work, the standards which were created, the environment, everything that went into that, I loved, and I was competitive and I loved it. And then when I went into the world of work, because water polo, there's not a flourishing financial remuneration from being a great water polo player. So I went into world of work. I went into a leadership program at Virgin Media for 2 years. And then I joined a startup with Stephen Bartlett back in 2014, where we built Social Chain for the next 4 years until 2019, which became one of the fastest growing companies out of the UK. And again, I took a lot of the principles and learnings from my time in elite sport in terms of hiring, building culture, building team chemistry, a lot of the things which you then need, not just from a leadership standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint. And that we went from a small team of probably 20 people to hundreds of employees across 5 offices around the world within 4 years. So, and we didn't get everything right. And that's when I started thinking about this concept, because a lot of leaders, a lot of people go into the world of work and they don't have the training or the concepts of, well, how do I become a high performer? What action should I take? If you've not seen it, so if you've not been in a part of a team or if you've not had a great leader, it's hard. It's like this unknown world. And which is why the High Performance podcast, which you mentioned, is doing so well. Damien Hughes, who's one of the co-hosts, was actually on when I was at that Virgin Graduate Scheme, he delivered one of the first ever talks back in 2011. So that kind of topic is something which is interesting to me. I hopefully live and breathe it in my personal life. Like we've spoke about before, I train for High Rocks now that I'm an old man with 2 young kids and are consistently injured. It's the only thing to give me my competitive drive and kind of spirit. But yeah, hopefully today we can talk about some of the character traits which everyone listening can adopt, how you become a high performer and a great person to work with within that team context. And I can showcase or share some of the learnings from not just Social Chain, but Wiser. I was part of the Hook Group's growth story ahead of their IPO. So I've kind of experienced the world of elite sport, but then also spent the last couple of decades in the world of business and high growth startups.
Yeah, awesome. So much, such like a diverse kind of career, and now really excited for you that you're kind of starting your own business as like someone who's known you for a little bit of time. It's such a great kind of journey for you to go on. But just like to plug really quickly, where can people find more information about the business you started?
Elite Team Tactics. So if you go to eliteteamtactics.com, There's a free weekly newsletter, so that comes every Sunday. So no charge at all. Get great insights from the world of elite sports, business, tech, special forces, the
Mhm.
medical field. And then we also have a leadership program which is launching on March the 6th, which helps leaders from around the world build high-performing teams.
Well, let's talk about building high performing teams, but let's start with a journey, like your kind of a maybe more personal journey. What do you think is the highest performing team you've been a part of, and why?
So I would say the water polo team, purely because we had everything that you need in a we didn't have the most talent, I would say, but we had everything you need to build a high performing team. So if I was to break that down, high self-belief. So none of us had played water polo before. A lot of us were swimmers, but we came together. We had an inspirational coach, leader, communicator who could articulate the vision, set great goals. He'd been there and done it before, so it also gave us belief. We had one of the things which I think is crucial, which most people forget to do, is create your non-negotiables. So what are the standards which you were going to live by? So for example, being on time. If we were on time to train, if you were late to training, you had to do extra laps. You can think Coach Carter, I don't know if you've ever seen the film. It was
Yeah.
like that. And we were 13 years old and training started at 5 a.m. at the aquatic center. So it's like at 13 years old, when you're a teenager, it's like not where you want to be at, 5, 6 a.m. But that created a belief in us that we're punctual. We stick to what we say by, and your other teammates would call you out if you weren't training well, or if you were
Mm.
late, or if you weren't focused. We had a peer accountability for high performance, which I think is crucial. And then other good things that people don't talk about in high performance. We had a great sense of humor. It's difficult. You have to do things that are hard and embrace discomfort regularly. Push yourself out your comfort zone, and without some jokers in the team and that kind of culture where you don't take things too seriously, I think that's often
Mm.
something which people don't speak about. But actually, when you're driving towards something on a season where there's ups and downs and key moments, someone to lift up the mood and bring energy as well as performance, I think is important. And we visualized it literally the first or second training session. I remember the coach, Mr. Jones, shout out to Mr. Jones. He came and said, "We're going to be national champions." And no one believed him, I don't think, in that first moment. But the fact he spoke it into existence, that I think then set the bar. That's where everybody's focused. And if you read the book, Will It Make the Boat Go Faster, about the Olympic rowing team, they had the similar kind of tunnel vision focus, and then every other question was like, will it make that boat go faster? And we were the same thing. Is this going to help us win the national championship? Our diet, our training sessions, we then introduced weight sessions because we didn't think we were strong enough in the pool. We then did extra swimming. Everything was, how can we then reach that vision which he'd set? So I think often people, even in business, it's like, where are people going to, and
Mm.
making it meaningful so that people want to do it, and then articulating it to each person differently.
And how did you then, like, because this was in your kind of formative years, how did you
Yeah.
then translate this into a business environment?
So the standards piece is every company or team I've been in, that's been an important thing to do.
What are some of
Uh,
the standards that you've set?
so for example, if we were to take Wiser right now, expecting more. So whether it's your work, whether it's what a client asks for, whether it's one of your clients had a baby, so making sure they get a baby grow. What are
Hmm.
the things which you can do to expect more? Whether it's delivering things on time, whether it's asking one more question in a meeting to sense check that everything is going in the right direction. Taking ownership. High performers have high accountability. They feel like they can control the future. They have high self-efficacy. So that's something where it's like, how can you take ownership? If there's a problem, don't pass the buck.
Hmm.
Don't blame other people, like Netflix, the no blame principle. But I think you need 5. I would say more than 5 is hard to remember. 3 to 5 core standards, or I call them non-negotiable behaviors, that you live by as a team.
Hmm.
Every successful coach has had it. Clive Woodward, I'm obviously come from a rugby background. We won the Rugby World Cup England in 2003, and he is huge on what are they had 12 non-negotiable behaviors. Another
Hmm.
one was like they had to be on time. They had to be 10 minutes early actually before any training session. They had to train better than they played. There were things like that which they then all agreed to, which I think is often missed. So if
Mm.
you do this exercise, it can't just be like the leader sets them and then, everyone has to live by them. It needs to be co-created by everybody. And then that means you have buy-in straight away. So then once you've got buy-in, then it's like, well, you said you were going to do that. What is the reason you're not doing that? And then that question isn't as aggressive because it could be health. It could be they've got a family issue. You can delve into what's the speed bump or the problem which is stopping them from living the behavior which they agreed to live
Mhm.
by for the next however long year period or 2 year period.
Firstly, that there is funnily enough, a very good episode of Clive Woodward on the High Performance podcast, which is really worth kind of listening to get a sense of like what kind of dive into that concept in a bit more detail. One of the things that really stood out for me is that he didn't set the cultural norms and the standards of his business, of his group. The team did, and then presented that back to him, and that enabled a deeper level of accountability because it was a peer-on-peer interaction
Yeah.
that was set at a very, very high bar. But even through like just more like, we're talking about kind of values or non-negotiables, but even talking about what are the activities within your role or within your job that lead to a successful outcome, that are kind of tried and tested. And if you're not completing those actions, why not? And that's like a more like a very tactical way of like looking at this problem as well. If you don't have like an established group, you as an individual can say, I know that in order to be successful in this job, I have to do these 5 things to be successful. You're taking ownership of that, to your other point. And then you can also be held accountable by your manager and say, look, why haven't you said you were going to do this, why haven't you? And it's not like a kind of an accusation. It's more of a conversation around, we know that this is what it takes, and so
Yeah.
what's happening that is not enabling us to get to that point.
Yeah. And also 46% of our behaviors on everyday behaviors are out of habit.
Mm.
So when you think about yourself, set yourself up for success. What are your systems which you have in place? So for example, I literally live by my Google Calendar. So on there, it's got from when I wake up with the kids, what am I doing with the kids, or the gym beforehand. It's got, say, I need to write social content to start building for the new company. It's like in my calendar every single day blocked out. Whether it's diet or meal planning for my health or my fitness journey, that's in my calendar. So I've got systems set up with reminders. And then at the end of each day, I've got something called the shutdown ritual, where I reflect on my day and I go, what was one good thing that happened? What's one bit of momentum, a win? So you start to then look for those in your subconscious. It gives you positive forward momentum. What was one thing that was difficult or that I could learn from or that I could do better next time? So you're reflecting on that, especially if you're in a team, and then you can also present that back to your boss or manager. And then what's one thing I'm grateful for, whether it's a person, someone else has helped you on a project, and actually go message that person. People don't do that enough. You putting out a message saying, someone did it to me yesterday, actually. I introduced her to a contact of mine, and then she put a LinkedIn post saying how grateful she was. And I just was doing that because she's a great friend and she's great at her role. But the fact that she then said thank you for it, again, makes me feel good, positivity out in the world, it pays forward. And I think then having that in my calendar, I then plan what are the 3 to 5 things from my to-do list, which are linked to my goals, am I going to schedule in my calendar on the next day?
And I think that it's easy for someone who's not working right now or is potentially thinking about their next move to say, well, that's all well and good for you. You've got a job, whatever, but I can't do that. But actually, I think it applies just as well for someone who is actively looking for their next job right now. Like taking control over your day in an environment where you might feel like you don't have any control because you're waiting on other people to action things for you. For example, like you might be waiting for someone to respond to you. You might be waiting for someone to email you about that next job. You might be waiting for someone to introduce you to someone else. There's a lot of elements of our life, I think, as we go through like a job search process that we don't have control over. But putting structure and thinking about what you want to input into this process actively and putting structure around that, I think, can be really valuable. And your day, and you're thinking about your mental well-being as well alongside that, and that's part of the structure that you're building into your day, rather than kind of letting the ongoing lethargy of like the challenge of the situation build up and build up and build up, and you kind of, that can become almost overwhelming if you lose control of that momentum.
Yeah. And if you're looking for a job, one thing I would say that's massively helped people that in my network and myself is define what your spikes are. Have you ever heard of the spikes term? Superpowers. I call them spikes because a good mentor of mine, Rene Carriel, he wrote a whole book about them. And now your spikes, you shouldn't have loads of spikes. You should probably have 3 to 5 really strong spikes. And they categorize them, or you can define them in three kind of core areas. So they're tasks that you do, activities that you do, that you're interested about, that you would look at or research in your spare time when no one's watching. Number two, they have to be challenging and that push you out of your comfort zone, but you enjoy. It's like game theory. We never want to do the same level over and over again. And third, and probably most important, they're usually things which you're better at than your peer group. So they're the things that come naturally because of your personality type, your upbringing, your background. You've just got a natural tendency or an unfair advantage in that field. So, for example, one of mine, I would say, is leadership. I grew up in a rugby club from the age of 3, and my dad was vice chairman. So I was meeting lots of different people, lots of different cultures, lots of different communication styles, from people that were, high up in the Fortune 500 to carpenters. So I learned like the communication and how you get people together to achieve something, because that was an unfair advantage because of my upbringing. I also enjoy it because then I did it and then I became better at it and then it challenged me. So it's usually you do that over and over again, whether you're young or old, anything, you gain motivation and momentum. And the curiosity thing, I read about it. I've got 5 books here. I've got books over there. It's just something that I'm interested in because then I know I can get better at it. It's not something that's like an end point. Like becoming a great leader is something which is in this world, it's ever changing. So the leadership point for me is one of my spikes. It could be communication. It could be attention to detail. And if you're in legal or a lawyer, but just define your 3 to 5. Then look for jobs which have listed your spikes. You go, actually, that is one of my spikes, and it'll help you analyze job specs and right companies. But then also when you go to the interview stage, you can then articulate really well why you are best suited for the job, because it's one, and you can even use spikes or superpowers, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, and also I think using that language that is also echoed by career theorists, I guess, if you would like to call them, and like people who are really well respected. And so, like, look, I understand my frameworks of being successful to look and sound like this, and this is why I've chosen them, and to show that you've put real thought in behind this sort of stuff. Yeah. Also, is like a separator. It makes you look like you've genuinely put in the work to understand who you are and what makes you successful. And that, I think, is also like a really nice way to separate yourself in a really competitive interviewing environment that will stand out, because not a lot of people are that introspective and have done that work to really deeply understand their spikes, I guess. And can showcase how and why, and also why it's useful to your business now. And that's like, maybe that's the extra kind of, this is why this spike is going to benefit your company, and as a result I'm a good match for that. And that's like a 10x really, and something I really rarely see nowadays.
Oddison James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained, and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all.
I've got a framework for getting a job. Do you want me like a fun one?
No, I don't think that would be relevant for us.
Yeah. So it was inspired by. So there was a guy. He's one of my best friends now. He's called Dodds. And
he's called what? Sorry.
He's called Dodds. DODDZ.
Dodds. Okay. Is he someone who we could find online?
Yeah, you can check him out online. Yeah, Instagram. Big shout. Okay. He's big in the virtual art scene now. He's quite famous in that space.
The virtual art scene. Well, content we're not going to get a lot of here in
Facebook, Instagram. Yeah. But when it was 2016, we were year 2 of Social Chain, and I remember we just won a big award, and the next day we're all in the office, a little bit hungover, and this massive, I'm talking about probably 6 foot long fish flying around the office, remote control, flying around the office. I'm like, what is this fish? Because also we've got security, 2 levels of security on the door. So how's the fish got in? Fish, obviously, everyone's then looking at this fish going, what's going on? On the bottom end of the remote control bit of the fish, it had a USB stick and it said, "Do not watch." Obviously, you're gonna watch it. And in there, when we put it into play, everybody's round the computer watching what's going to happen. So number one, he's captured everyone's attention. That's the number one thing I would say in the
Mhm.
framework. You got to capture attention in an unusual way. Don't just send your CV in, because it needs to capture someone's attention in a really unusual way, a memorable way. Then number two, you need to demonstrate value almost immediately. So on that video, he had a sick edit, great edit, good use of animation, and he was basically telling the story of how there was a big opportunity to do daily vlogging, and it wasn't that big in the business world back then, and Steve should get on YouTube, etc. And what he would do with the content. So that was like number two, demonstrate value and that you have the skill set which people need and the culture alignment which people need. So he talks about his values on there as well. And then number three, make it a no-brainer. And so I think at the end of the video, he said, I will, just to prove the value of this and how I think the YouTube is such a big opportunity for you as a business, I will come and film for a week, or maybe it might have said a month, for free, and document it every day. And we'll upload a video on YouTube every day. So all three things he hit in the framework. He was hired obviously immediately. And then after like 2 days or 3 days, he's following Steve all around the world, speaking on stages and stuff. Content was going up, views were going up. He got a job immediately.
I remember as well. It also really works on like the sales front. I had someone reach out to me recently to talk about a product that they thought would be relevant for me, and they'd already gone in, built a demo environment, showed an example of like of the product running for me. That I was like, wow, that's really impressive. And then I forwarded it to my boss, and now we're having a conversation with them about because they've already demonstrated the value of that product rather than telling me about it. They've showed me, and I think this concept of like show don't tell is like critical in this job market. Like, and also the last kind of element of this, and it kind of almost comes back down to that kind of first point of structuring your day, is take control. You know, at least at this point, if you found a job or a business that you think you could have a real impact in, you have taken control of that narrative, of that business is going to think about you by showcasing your value very quickly, and the impact you can have on that business very quickly. And that's a great framework to follow.
And I believe in ripples of positivity. So if you put something out like you were just saying there, show don't tell, even if that didn't come off, you've put out a nice ripple there. Someone's going to remember that. Then they're never going to turn around and go, oh, who's that guy who just did that, or who's that girl who just sent in this information. Even if it's not right, they know someone. They might be best friends with somebody else, and you go into a different process, and then you're in that interview process, and then they go for dinner that night, and they speak, oh my God, I actually met that guy. He put he built this environment for me. He put a fish in the office. So then it's like people trust other people's recommendations way more than you just saying how good you are. So the more positive vibrations or ripples you can put out into the world, I think the better.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting concept, because we also have this like trend in LinkedIn at the moment of people talking really negatively about either their experience of leaving a job or their experience of not being able to get a job. And I those ripples of negativity, let's say, I don't think have positive outcomes.
Yeah, I agree, because whenever I look into hiring somebody, I always think, is this person going to be a high performer? And then what do I look for? So I'm looking for consistency. So have they done this skill set or the passion or the area? Have they been in it for a long time? Because usually that's a good determinant that they enjoy that pursuit. Number two, do they take ownership of their actions, their responsibilities? How can you ask for that? So like I always ask a question in an interview, what's your greatest achievement and how did you contribute?
What are you looking for with that?
Because I'm thinking, what did they classify as a great achievement? Is it going to be related to the tasks or the projects which we're working on as a team? So are their skill sets that they worked on in that greatest achievement going to be applicable? And number two, a lot of people in teams play a certain role, and I want to identify what role they played. And they don't have to be the person that came up with the idea, delivered the best thing, but they just need to be self-aware enough to know the role they contributed and the value they can deliver, because I then know that on the flip side, they'll do the same thing here. Number three, then within that greatest achievement, if they just talk about themselves or something that they've just done by themselves, it's not the end of the world. But if they're coming into a team environment, I would ideally want them to talk about something they've done within a team context, and also showcase some of the things which went wrong, some of the things which didn't go to plan and how they overcame them. Because that's like a big thing for any high performer. I would say it's like you run to failure. you see it as a growth moment. You don't see it as a failure. We either win or we learn, and that's the same in sports. Like that kind of mentality means that I saw an interview with Pep Guardiola, one of the best football coaches of all time, and he said what differentiates the world class players from the great players is their ability to forget a mistake in the moment. Say they make a bad pass or they miss a shot on target, how quickly can they get back to point zero in their emotional control? I was like, actually, I would have never thought about that, but that is so true.
Totally.
Even in a work context, when you've got stress or things happening, it's like something goes wrong. Like you were saying before, what can you control? And if it's out of your control, then how can you compartmentalize it in your brain so then it's not affecting your behavior moving forward?
What's quite interesting about that is you have to simultaneously have a growth mindset, i.e. want to learn from your mistakes, but while simultaneously resetting against that mistake immediately if you need to then go and perform the next action.
Yeah.
Which is a very hard, confluence of almost opposing concepts.
Yeah.
You have to be expert in to be one of the best people in that category in the world. Like if I speak from like personal experience, like I hold a very high bar for myself, and as a result, will learn and grow hopefully quite quickly because of the bar that I set for myself. It also means that I dwell on my mistakes too much. That's me not doing the second part.
Yeah. I've actually got it in my notes. I don't know if you ever tried that, because I was the same, and especially from in my sporting days, I'd get really down, and so now I've got something in my Apple Notes which is in your control, out your control, and when I feel anxious or stressed, I'll then write down a list of things which are for the problem statement. What's in my control, and if it's in my control, I will try and do at least 1 to 3 things that day. Because then I feel like I'm progressing or making something. So then I remove the anxiety. And if it's not in my control, I then put it into the other notes, which is outside of my control.
Yeah.
And it just kind of helps me mentally like move it out of my brain. So it's like kind of throw it out of my brain. And it's like, well, actually, that's out of my control. Whereas these ones are in my control. Let's go on those ones.
Again, like a really nice reminder to people as they're going through the interview, like the job search process. Put down explicitly and have a note of yourself, like what you do and don't have control over.
Yeah.
There are lots of things that you don't have control over in your job search, but there's a lot you also do, and understanding and having like a really clear like relationship with both of those items, it will drastically help the impact and return of your input, but also will help you mentally process the output better. If you, especially those things you don't have control over, and I really can't kind of talk to that enough, because it is probably one of the biggest frustrations. Like ghosting is being frustrated about something you intrinsically have no control over, and that doesn't make it not frustrating, but it's understanding what your relationship is with that outcome and who you should be like, and is it worth spending time on being upset or angry about that thing that you ultimately can't change and have no outcome to.
Yeah, because the root cause of a lot of frustration, like you were saying there with ghosting, but just in general, can be anything, performance, culture, teams. I think it's miscommunication. And so if you're a person that can communicate in a really effective way and almost over communicate your expectations, that is, number one, a great trait to have. But in that situation, a way that I've always thought, if I was ever to get ghosted, at the end of the next interview I had, I would say, thanks so much. I really enjoyed this process. What can I expect as the next steps? And then you're taking control or ownership over that, because then they kind of have to give you a response. And if they don't then follow up on that day, then it gives you a reason to message. And you're not then the needy boyfriend or girlfriend's like, well, what about me vibe. It's like you've got to try and pin them down if you can to a date. Don't be pushy, obviously, but it's like as a high performer, I'm all about over communicating and setting expectations. What can I expect for the next few steps of this process in terms of dates and timelines, so that I can bring the best possible version of myself, and I can make sure that then hopefully some people will still ghost you, but hopefully that will help with some of them.
For sure. I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I kind of coach my recruiters on is that like negative candidate experiences all stem from communication, expectation setting. And every single time you you should always set an expectation, and you should always exceed that expectation. And then you will always have a good candidate experience. And every time we miss that or miscommunicate that, we are exposing ourselves to a potential risk in having that person having a good experience.
Yeah.
And we can control all of those variables. And if we can't, for example, with my episode of Darren Bush, we talked about how to get feedback from hiring managers, and that's quite a challenge. Then it's up to like the recruiting systems and infrastructure for us to find a way to make that easier to create that feedback loop. But at least we've identified like what the root cause is that's delivering that misexpectation and misalignment of communication.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that.
We are so excited to be sponsored by HireGuide. HireGuide is an end-to-end interview decision platform that makes hiring decisions faster, fairer, and twice as predictive of on-the-job employee performance. As a recruiting leader, I've been looking for a tool that can help me run better interviews across my organization at scale to make better hiring decisions. So when I found HireGuide, I thought all my hopes had been answered. They use cutting-edge AI and behavioral science to enable you to operationalize structured interviews and skills-based hiring that can help you find those star candidates. Hiring a dream team is no easy task, but with HireGuide, it can be.
So we talked a lot. There's been some awesome like tidbits coming into this that we've amazing kind of tips and insights on how to position yourself as a high performer and how to find that next opportunity. So just to consolidate some of this, what are some of the key traits of high performers that you've observed? And then my follow-up question to that is, how can you position yourself as a high performer against those traits, do you think?
Yeah, so I think I shared this with you earlier. So there's a famous 400-meter runner called David Hemry. Check him out from the 1960s. So in 1968 in Mexico, the Olympics, he won a gold medal for GB, which was phenomenal. But then more interestingly, I found was that the next 2 or 3 years after he won, he was obsessed with finding out what separated the people that won gold medals or set world records or that won leagues versus the great players who were still there or the great athletes that were still there. And so he interviewed 62 world record breakers or Olympians from 22 different sports across 12 different countries. And there were some commonalities in the traits which they had, which I think are interesting, especially for your listeners, in terms of, am I demonstrating or showcasing this? I'll go through a couple of them. Number one is self-belief. And so you'll often get asked in an interview question around your skill sets, what you can do. The more that you can demonstrate the belief you have in your own abilities, but more importantly, what you can do for that company or that team, the impact you can make. I'd always think about it, what impact can I make? That is a huge one. People will be looking out for that. This one's for all the introverts out there. 89% of the 62 were introverted, which I thought was interesting, because when you think about this Nike commercial, who's like an athlete, it's all these people that were the great speeches, etc. But actually, 89% of those high achievers were introverts. And the rationale behind that was they can spend a lot of time by themselves, which you need consistency, work ethic, when no one's watching, when you're not getting the adulation, etc.
And also, like, just to add on to that, one of the problems in interviewing a lot of the time, especially interviewing virtually, is that we don't think that someone has the right energy or is passionate for this job. Or like, and if I look through like feedback through my years, like probably one of the biggest biases that have emerged in the last 5 years is, oh, I just didn't think that they were that interested in us, or they didn't come across as like very high energy. And it's so consistent, this type of feedback. And I think any recruiter listening to this is like, oh yeah, I've got like dozens of cases where I've seen that feedback before, especially in a virtual environment where it's quite hard to demonstrate extrovert and outward energy and interest. But it's so funny that like on the other side of it, all the data strongly indicates that being introverted and there's many different scenarios where that's been the case as well.
Yeah, exactly. Another one was consistency. Mm-hmm. So they've done something for decades. So again, when you're thinking about your CV or how you position yourself, even if it's not on your CV or you've not had this amount of years experience doing it, you will have been doing soft skills since you were a child. In your, like I was saying there about my water polo days, you would have learnt skills, whether it's communication, leadership, inspiration. You've got high attention to detail, whatever it may be for you. Think about what you've been doing for a consistent period of time. And the second one to link it to in terms of what those traits of those high performers, was they enjoyed their field. So some of them, interestingly, didn't start till later, until they were in their late teens, but the pursuit and the curiosity of their field came across in buckets. So again, when you're interviewing, showing that passion, the books or the podcasts or the newsletters you read, what you found interesting in the most recent one, which you can share in that interview, I think is an important one. And the last two, which I think are probably the most important, I mentioned before about sense of humor, sense of, so try and come across in a professional way. But if you can make someone smile in that interview process at least once, look at yourself. If you're smiling, they're more likely to have a certain feeling. And that sense of humor, I think, is important. But the other two were their response to failure. So what are their tolerance for discomfort? So how can you showcase? You don't have to be overly negative or give the X Factor story, before you go on, but you will have gone through things which are hard. Everybody, like Matt, I'm sure you have, I have. Just position it in a way where you are, for the things you care about and the people that you care about and the projects you work on, you've experienced hard times and you've come out the other side and you've learned X, Y, and Z. So it's all about not just taking that as a negative. It's like, well, what have I learned, and what did I then achieve off the back of it? Mm-hmm. And then the last one is how they treat people. And I think this is huge. And I always think about this, like how you treat the receptionist when you walk in, how you say hello to, even when you're then in the team, how you treat the cleaner, how you treat everybody, how you treat a client. Your manners are so important. And I drill this into I've got 2 young kids, like pleases, thank yous. They're just things which are free. And also, depending on your background, like making the effort to go above and beyond and try and find out about someone's story, and try and have a positive impact and treat people in a way that you would want to be treated, I think is undervalued. And when they did the research, that was something that came out across all of them. I think it was like 95% of people treat people in a way that was different and unique.
For sure. There's that kind of old story about someone not returning the glass that they were given at the start to the kitchen area after an interview and them not getting the job. And I remember this creating a storm recently on social media. But I think really like the story behind the story is like, are you like, it actually speaks to a lot of the values that you talked about here. Are you going to go one step beyond to like one of the first values that you've put into your team? Are you treating others how you'd like to be treated? Are you cleaning up after yourself? Like, are you kind of structured and thoughtful? Like you want things to be like where they are. There's like a lot of like low key dynamics that are happening when you do small actions like this that are indicators of how you could be in a role that people are going to be looking for. And they're all opportunities. Like being kind is absolutely free, and can never be underestimated. Well, look, Alex, to round us out then, I'm going to ask you an interview question.
Great.
So hopefully one that given our topics today you'll be comfortable with, but I think it's a good idea to model it.
I've not been interviewed in such a long period of time.
Well, here we go. This is it. One shot interview. If you get this right, you might have a returning spot on the podcast. So I'd love to hear about a time that you failed in the last couple of years and what you learned from that failure.
The biggest failure from a business perspective is we wanted to launch out a new service line for our marketing. We launched it, had lots of input from across the team, from social to paid, and it fell flat on its face. And the couple of reasons for that were the positioning of how we launched it on the website was slightly incorrect due to my guidance. We then also didn't reach out to our current clients and engage them in a way that would have got initial traction. And then the final point is that it was too expensive. It wasn't actually what customers wanted. So since then, we have rebranded it, renamed that service line. We've then relaunched it literally at the end of last year. And we've got 3 clients now signed up. We've got 1 case study, hopefully will be wrapped up in the next 2 weeks. But I think it was a relatively new team that we'd hired for. Mm-hmm. And the morale based on they're not getting the same amount of traction as the other 2 teams within the marketing department, I felt bad that I had almost not given it as much attention that I should have and overestimated the results that I thought we would get organically. And so that is one of my weaknesses is I am optimistic. I'm a yellow on the personality Myers-Briggs model. So one of my things I always have to be wary of is I'm overly optimistic. So I still think Man United are going to win the league this year, even though it's like, possible.
Have you, Stephen, and Man United? You can't stop talking about it.
Yeah. But that is something that, so usually now when I'm making big decisions, I'll try and get 3 objective people, one from business, one from my personal life, and one of my friends, to give me feedback on actually what they think, if I'm making the right decision. If it's like a system 1, a type 1 decision where it's like irreversible versus type 2 decision. So that's something that I've then implemented because I know that's a weakness in my game. Mm-hmm. And then personally, the biggest failure is I set myself a goal last year of running a sub 60 Hyrox, and I trained my arse off and I dieted. I got in the best shape of my life, and then I just didn't hit it. And I was so confident I was going to hit it. I put in all the work, all the training, all the mobility. And then the 2 times it just wasn't right on the day. I didn't feel good on one of the days. It was in Germany. And on the second one in Paris, I just didn't sleep well. So like both times, things which are, I would say, potentially outside of my control hindered my performance, but it's on me. There was not a team. It was on me. I could have done better. So this year I am pushing it even more with my training schedule.
I think we have covered really a lot within the category of high performance and how to position yourself to help as a high performer to help navigate your next job. And Alex, thank you so much for also modeling your kind of responses there. There's so much that we take away from failure and the desire to continue growing as well. And so much of the data indicates that people who are intrinsically motivated to grow and learn are within our kind of high performing categories around the world. And so demonstrating that, just for reference as well, it's also one of Amazon's like classic follow-up questions, like what what would you do differently next time? How would you approach this if this had failed? Like how would you recover from it? What were some of your key learnings? Like these are like classic follow-up interview questions that you should have a familiarity with, even if a project was successful. Being able to follow up with a reflection, which is when we look at the STAR format, is often an extra R. Say, next time I would have probably done it like this. And every single project, and even if it's the most successful project in the world, that we have done in our careers, can probably be iterated on. And this is a good example of that. So just to close us out then, what would be your top 3 recommendations for candidates to position themselves as high performers in an interview process?
So number 1 is self-reflection. And sometimes this can be difficult, I think, to think about your own skill sets and try and identify your spikes. So an easy way to ease yourself into it is to think about the best person you've ever worked with and describe what are the character traits, the behaviors, the skills which they demonstrated, and write them down. And then cross-reference the areas where you need to improve against that person. I think that's a great way. If you're nervous about doing the self-reflection, I would focus on that as number 1. Number 2, I would create systems. Don't rely on motivation. Motivation wanes, whereas your systems, and get it in your diary. I think your calendar is such an underutilized tool because it goes off with notifications when you should do certain things. Also, batching anything. So like religiously and ruthlessly prioritizing your time for focused, high impact, high performance time in your diary on the things which will move the needle the most, whether it's a job search, whether it's your actual job. Try and do those things and get them in your diary. Ideally, get them done first. Eat the frog. And then third, if you want to become a high performer, set yourself some challenging goals. 20% of people set goals. Only 30% of that 20 write them down, and only 8% of people achieve them out of the 30. So a very small amount of people even write down their goals. So I would write down some goals you've got for this year, and then break them down into point 2, which is, well, how can I put in a routine to help me achieve that goal?
I think the third tip, the sub tip within that is identify your controllable inputs to those goals.
Yeah,
and like that's like almost like the underpiece here that feeds into all of the above, especially when it comes down to a job search. Identify your controllables, identify your non-controllables, and make sure that your goals and your structures are aligned around the controllables, not the uncontrollables.
Yeah, and if anyone's got any questions or wants to message me on LinkedIn and they've struggled with a job search or they've got specific challenges which they've got in their team, I'm more than happy to help, give advice. Yeah,
awesome. And where can they find you and Elite Team Tactics?
So LinkedIn, Alex Ayin, Ayin spelled Ayin, and also Elite Team Tactics is on there, but eliteteamtactics.com for everything that you'll need. The weekly newsletter, workshops, everything is on the website.
Awesome. And thank you so much for coming on. I've also really enjoyed your Substack as well, your email newsletter. It's been super interesting to read through that every single week. We also have our own newsletter as well, which you can, the link's in the comments, but check it out on the Open to Work community website. And tune in next week for more useful, impactful advice on how you can navigate the super challenging job market. And once again, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.